Hi everybody, in today's video we're going to talk about some significant changes that Amazon has made to the used buy box, which has negatively impacted Amazon used booksellers, particularly those doing FBA. Now I'll start by saying that I've been selling on Amazon for a very long time, and this change is not good. Okay, there's no getting around that. This is a negative, generally speaking, for Amazon used booksellers. So let me give you some background. This is the third time this has happened this year in 2025. What happened in February earlier this year? I think for about 30 days or so, maybe it was 3 weeks, I don't remember exactly, but they made this change, and it is what we are seeing today, where the used buy box is being favored to merchant fulfilled sellers or the lowest price overall. We also saw this change in in September of this year, and that happened for a few days, less than a week, I think. And I think each time, Amazon sellers like myself just thought, hey, maybe this is a glitch, and it's gone back to the way it's been. Now, as I make this video, it's well over a month, and I think we now need to get to the point and make some decisions as to what exactly is going on. And in fact, if we go into Seller Central, within the past 24 hours, they posted this. Now, I know they posted some other stuff, which I didn't pay that much attention to, but now given the time and given this, and this is supposed to be an Amazon employee, apparently, maybe they're whatever, in some capacity, they work from Amazon, and this is very, very clear that Amazon does not give a preference to any fulfillment channel. That's what they say. They say they're agnostic, right? And we're going to get into this a little bit deeper, right? So, and let me give a little bit more clarification for those that may be new on what exactly we're talking about with this used buy box. So prior to about November 3rd, November 5th of 2025, the used buy box, and I'm going to show you some examples, was granted more frequently, a lot more frequently, to those selling FBA, even if their price was higher, right? And some customers they want Prime, right? They don't really even look at the other offers. They just would click it because it's a buy box. Other sellers or other buyers, and I'll include myself in that, right? We would click down and we'd look for the lowest price or the best offer, and that's what we would buy, and we'd be able to flip it because the used buy box was going to FBA sellers, and that's what we do, sell FBA. And then there's some other customers that probably just didn't even know, right? They would just click on the buy box. Maybe they weren't even Prime sellers. We don't know, right? They would just click on it anyway. All right. So that's kind of what happened. That's the way it used to be. And now, and I'm going to show you some examples. That is not where we are. And I think we now have almost graduated to something that I'm going to call, at least for the moment, the pricing condition first used buy box error, which essentially has begun around early November 2025, and that's where we are today as I make this video. So what I'm going to go over today, I'm going to go over how the used buy box works now. We're going to take it a lot further than what Amazon has said, at least in that statement, and we're going to talk a little bit about why Amazon likely made this change. And we've spent the next thing we're going to talk about what the data shows. We spent about the last 2 weeks, I had my team going in, and we spent an awful lot of time looking at data and analyzing. We picked 500 random ASINs. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And I'm going to share the data results with you, the summary, so you'll kind of get a better idea. Is really, what is this impact? How much of a change is this really? And a lot of other things. So we'll get into that. And then I'll give my recommendations moving forward. And I will tell you, I am going to tell you, some people are not going to like this, and that's fine, right? But I'm going to tell you like it is. There's some people that should no longer be selling on Amazon simply because of this change, okay? And I've been selling, again, a long time. I've seen lots and lots of changes on Amazon. I've gone through a lot, ups and downs, this and that, and that's what happens in business. But this is different. This is a fundamental change, and you're going to need to make some adjustments to whatever you're doing now if you're selling used books on Amazon, in particular FBA. All right, let's take a few minutes and look at some examples on what we're seeing out there. Okay, so in this first one, we can see that the merchant fulfilled offer at 49.38 here is actually priced much higher than the other merchant fulfilled offers, but they got the used buy box. It's not shown, but the only FBA offer was $59. They did not get the used buy box, but most likely it appears that it was given to this seller because they were in good condition, and the other ones, four other ones that we see here, are all in acceptable condition. So that is the result for that one. All right, this next one, the merchant fulfill gets the used buy box over FBA with the same exact price. So that's interesting, right? And I did not, you couldn't see the rating, but it was 93% versus 100%. So I don't think that had a lot to do with it. It really just came down to the condition of the book, where merchant fulfilled got the buy box even though it was priced exactly the same as FBA. All right, how about this one? FBA does get the used buy box, and probably because they were in acceptable condition. Two of them. So 99.91 is going to FBA, even though there were lower offers, but they were in acceptable condition. This is something we've seen out there. A lot of people have seen this. This is where we have two used buy boxes, and they're not always, you would think, you could even understand if Amazon were going to do merchant fulfilled and FBA, one over the other. I think I've seen that. I don't know that I've seen two FBA offers, but I don't know. But anyway, this is what we're seeing here. This actually happens to be both merchant fulfilled offers. And what do we have here? All right, so this one is a little bit of an exception. I'm going to get into more of this when we look at the data that we went over, but merchant fulfilled in acceptable condition got the used buy box, right? They're at 60.23, and they're getting it probably because the lowest FBA and the next lowest price is $140. So I'm not so sure a customer wants to pay $80 more to get one grade acceptable, one grade better book. All right, and this is the last one we'll do. All right, so the merchant fulfilled seller gets the used buy box, and they're priced just 33 cents less than FBA, and I think they're in the same condition. Yeah, so you know, this is what we're dealing with. So now these were just some examples, but I'm going to go into what's more important, right, is really looking at the summary of the data, that we have a really good idea of what's going on. We'll get into that shortly, but first let me talk about likely why Amazon has made this change. Now, I know people have asked and they want to know, but at the same time, I will tell you, I know your time is valuable and I appreciate you guys watching this video, but you can feel free to skip right over this if you want. I'll put a timestamp on the bottom here if you don't want to hear my thoughts on it, because at the end of the day, we're probably never going to know exactly why Amazon made this change, and my opinion probably doesn't even matter that much, but if at all. But I at least want to address it, right? Because I do have ideas, and I know people think about it and they like talking about it. So I guess the first thing I'll say, here's a couple of ideas that I've thought about. First, in 2023, Amazon went to a more regionalized setup with their fulfillment centers. I think they have over 180 fulfillment centers in the United States, but they have 8 different regions. And whenever somebody, if you don't know, I used to sell private label, right? When you send in private label or even a ton of wholesale stuff, what they'll do is they'll spread it out amongst those areas, right? And so if I send in a boatload of this water jug, they will go ahead and they'll send it out to all 8, so that once a customer buys it, they can get it more quickly, and saves them on the expense of shipping it to some extent, right? So that's what they do with a lot of their products. But used books, if you think about it, are very different, right? If I have a used book sitting here, just one single copy, right, and I only have one SKU for this book, and it's sitting here in a warehouse in Florida, and a customer in Seattle whose FBA wants it, well, they've got to ship it all the way across the country and do so fairly quickly, and that's probably going to cost them extra money, right? So I don't think used books, they don't fit in, right, because they're usually like one-offs. They are an exception in that way. The other thing I've thought about is the timing of this issue. Now, given I think we're at the point that maybe I don't know if I should skip over it, but I'll at least mention it. But Amazon makes a ton of errors when in the fulfillment center when they're opening up boxes. In fact, I've told my prep centers, we had a sticker, or I had stickers made up and put them inside the box and telling the fulfillment center to scan each item individually, because they weren't doing that. They'd look at, maybe I had 2 copies of a book and they actually had different SKUs, or maybe they just made an error altogether, and they would just, they're under the gun over there in those fulfillment centers. I can tell you, I haven't been in there myself for a tour, and they're making mistakes. So maybe they've said, okay, we're making too many. And the reason how I know they're making mistakes, and you probably know this, is you send in one book and they say you have 4 copies of that book and you didn't send in 4 copies. You sent 1 or 2. So they are definitely making mistakes. And I've told them this time and time again. So we're trying to help them by putting these things in there. Anyway, bottom line is, perhaps they know they have these mistakes. We're getting into the fourth quarter. Maybe there's some rippled effects of this mistake, and then maybe they're doing an audit, they're doing a cleanup, and they put this whole thing on pause and they change the use by box. But I don't think anymore that's what's going on. The other thing is that they have data scientists over there that are looking at their profit per cubic foot, right, of space. And when we send a book in there, they're big, they're bulky. And by the way, if you think about it, compared to other items, they don't have any packaging, right? They just come like this. And maybe the robots have a harder time, picking them off the shelves or whatever. I don't know. But where I was going with this really was getting back to it comes down to money, right? And that's probably what it is, right? Regarding how much money they're making, if it's sitting on the shelf for an extended period of time and they could replace it with something that ships out quicker, maybe they make more in FBA fees. But the other huge thing, that one of the reasons I like doing used books compared to doing private label, is when you're doing private label, if you don't know, it's almost mandatory that you have to spend money, quite a bit of money. I've probably spent tens of thousands of dollars on advertising on Amazon's platform, right, to get noticed and to be put up front when someone does a search for a water bottle or whatever. You want yours showing up first on the first page, and you got to do that with advertising, right? So it's crazy. But anyway, used books, we don't do that, right? We don't pay for advertising. So does Amazon like that? Probably not. They probably want us to pay for advertising. They know they can't, right? That's the thing. They really, no, who's going to pay to advertise their used book on Amazon? No one. But so that could be an entire revenue stream that they're losing out with used books. So that's why they're doing it. They simply want less used books in their warehouse. I guess the other thing is there's an FTC lawsuit out there that's going to be settled next year in 2026. And I don't really think this has anything to do with that. But if that lawsuit comes out in the favor of the FTC, perhaps the good news for booksellers is we may see less high pricing errors where Amazon is not comparing our prices to prices that other people sell these used books on other platforms, right? And I think this really hurts, not so much booksellers, but really others, who are doing wholesale, and Amazon is trying to dictate to them, what they can sell their products for on other websites, whether it be Walmart or whatever. And if you think about it, you got to think to yourself, who the hell is Amazon to try to dictate to Amazon sellers what they can do on other platforms? So we'll see where this goes with this lawsuit. It'll be interesting. And the last thing, this probably, again, maybe not for nothing, but you probably, some of you may know that Amazon actually owns Abe Books. So maybe they do something with that, or they have plans to do more with Abe Books in a different way in the future. Again, I don't know. Those are just my thoughts. I have no inside information on exactly what they're doing. I'm just, looking at data, looking at information that's out there, and trying to make an assessment why they would do this. Because the thing that I didn't mention that jumps out at you is, why would isn't this hurting the customer? And in some ways, yes. In some ways, no. Some customers don't even know that they can buy books cheaper. Some, from merchant fulfilled sellers. And some of them are going to want nothing to do with it. And surely some of them are going to complain when they order a book. Doesn't come with any, doesn't come in Amazon packaging. It comes a couple of weeks late. And then they have the customer service piece. They're going to have to deal with the merchant fulfilled seller. So I guess maybe that's why they did it earlier this year, testing out the customers' tolerance for getting these books by changing the use by box. Anyway, it's just speculation at this point, but I think right now we're just going to have to, I think, just move on from this and see what the data tells us and take it from there. All right, so what does the data show us? So what we did was we spent, like I said, we looked at 500 random ASINs, and the 500 I picked were, ones that book flippers would want to flip and that had at least one or more FBA and merchant fulfilled offers at the time in which we did the analysis. We got all this data. We spent a lot of time doing it because I really want to know, we're data driven, right? I'm going to do what the data tells us, right? And try to decipher it and see, we want to make good data-based decisions regarding our business. The 2 used buy box, out of the 500, we only found 5. So that's 1% of them had 2 used buy boxes, so I don't think that's as big a deal. And let's move on. Now, this one's big, right? So we're going to talk about the used buy box. How often has it been FBA? So again, we did this in about the last 2 weeks. We've been doing this data analysis, so we are under this new era of how the used buy box is apparently going to perform. And before November 3rd, November 5th of 2025, and for all the time before that, we went over tens of thousands of ASINs, and it came out to really very close to being between 70 and 73%. Probably really more like 71 to 73% of the time, the used buy box was granted to an FBA offer. Okay, so that was our baseline, 73%. Now, what we found is after that, we are at about 20%. Okay, 20%. Of the 500, we randomly chose them, and I think we did a good job of this, is statistically sound sample size of what we're seeing out there for as far as used booksellers wanting to source books and resell on Amazon. Okay, so we went from 73% to 20%. Now, the next thing you want to know is, this is important, right? Is the lowest price getting the used buy box, right? Do I need to be the lowest price? And I got to tell you, this number is lower than what I thought it was going to be. It's only 28% of the time was the lowest price the used buy box. Okay, and what became clear is that the condition matters quite a bit, right? And you even saw that in just some of the samples that I just shared with you, though, that the lowest condition price was passed over for a better condition price. Okay. And then lastly, what we looked at was how often is the used buy box in acceptable condition. Okay. And it turns out only 2% of the time did that occur. Okay, 2%. Now let me give you a couple more details on this. We found a dozen books that had a seller rating less than 80%, and they got the buy box. So if you were in the 70% range as seller feedback, and the lowest one we found was 61%, they still got the used buy box, even though they had a low seller rating. So I don't know. So that was, what we found, based on that. I don't think, from what I can tell, I don't think people would agree if you've been looking at your own inventory, just looking on Amazon. I don't think that the seller rating matters all that much. Now, I guess when I take a look back at this collectively, it just seems very clear to me that Amazon simply doesn't want as many used books in their warehouse, right? That's my take from looking at this, and I don't know how you could really interpret it any other way, because that's what's going to happen if this continues. And I think at this point we just need to accept that this is not a system glitch, and if it is, or it goes back to the way it was from whatever reason, maybe we'll pivot, but I think we should accept that this is the way it's going to be moving forward. So speaking of moving forward, let me give you my recommendations. So I just said it, let me say it again. Let's stop treating this as a glitch. We cannot simply hope for things to get better. I don't think that's going to happen. I did that myself twice this year. I don't think I'm going to do that again, right? And of course, as time goes by, it's just the way it's going to be. If nothing changes, you're going to have to accept that. So sooner, maybe sooner rather than later might be the best course of action right now, with the exception of textbook season coming up. Okay, so textbook season is coming up very quickly, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I guess my recommendation is, I think if you're the type of person that doesn't want to, you're selling FBA and you don't want to make any changes, you just want to continue whatever you were doing exactly the way you want to do it, my recommendation would be for you to really stop selling on Amazon, right? Right? Stop selling used books on Amazon. It's simply not going to work. It can't work. Okay, not in this environment. Okay, that's clearly what the data is showing me. Okay, so that's my recommendation. You have to be willing to change. The other thing is, understand that other people are going to leave, right? And I've endured a lot. Again, as I said before, I've been selling on Amazon for a long time, full time, almost 10 years now, and I've seen a lot. I've seen people said they were going to quit when Amazon changed their interface, right? And I would just say to you, I encourage you, you need to do what's best for you, but don't let others influence you just because that's the way the wind is blowing, right? We've certainly never done that with our software or how we source books or anything like that. I don't necessarily, I'll listen to hear what other people have to say about how to do things, but I want to make sure I back it up with data and make sure it makes sense from a business perspective. So do what's best for you, but try to, as best you can, use data behind it and look at data, right? This business, a lot of people think it's all about books, but really a big part of that is understanding the data behind the books, understanding now the algorithm, and making adjustments along the way. Okay, now that we've seen what's going on with the used buy box, you can no longer source your books relying upon the lowest FBA as your reference point for selling price, and the same goes for repricing, okay? Instead, what you want to do is you want to forecast a price that is higher based upon a lot of good information that you can get. And here's where I think it really, really breaks down when you are sourcing books locally with an app that's basically telling you to do that, and that's really the only good information you have. Let me explain the difference between, briefly, because I know I can make a whole video on this, between doing online book arbitrage and sourcing in the stores. When you're sourcing at the stores, where library sale, whatever, you can probably pick out a section, right? Maybe you want to stay away from romance novels or whatever. But when you go to scan that book, you don't know if it's a textbook, you don't know the supply and demand historical data, you don't have time, this is big, to really analyze a Keepa chart on your phone, okay? And the Keepa chart is just part of it, right? So when you're doing online book arbitrage, especially with our software, you're going to be able to find out, hey, is there a price war going on? Am I getting the book at a good price historically? What are the other FBA offers without any data blind spots, right? You're looking at the real listing in live, and you know exactly what's going on. And you know how many are on stock, all these things. What's the historical data been? You've got a lot better information when you're doing online book arbitrage, when you're instead of doing local sourcing. So I would start with number one is that how can you source your books and relying upon the lowest FBA without even having a lot of good information at your fingertips to figure out if that's going to be a good selling price. And you were making that assumption, which was very good in the past, right? Up until before November 5th, that was great because you knew that the buy box was going to get this the FBA offers were going to get the used buy box, what did I say, 73% of the time. That's no longer the case. Now it's going to be 20% of the time, okay? And that might be just because there's not a lot of offers going on. So I just don't know how you can do local sourcing anymore using that method. That business model is much different than doing what I do, which is sourcing online, right? That business model is higher return on investment. Well, that sounds great. Higher return on investment, perhaps, but lower margins. Maybe you're only making, $5, $6 or even less per book if you're lucky, and if that's what the app tells you. And now I don't really think you can rely upon that app. I don't know how all those apps work. I want nothing to do with sourcing books locally, that's for sure. Now I really don't want anything to do with it, but I just don't know how that business model continues without being able to really speed up the process and get a better selection of books. We're able to do that in advance. We know when we look at the books, hey, we're getting the lowest price ever. Maybe we're looking at a book that has good supply and demand metrics. We're looking at books that have a price where we know that even before we even scan the book or even look at Keep a Chart, right? We can do that within our software. So I think it's a big difference. And I think if you are doing local sourcing and how on earth that can work, maybe you need to put a comment in here and educate me with what you're doing. Maybe I've got it wrong, but I don't think so, right? That's how the apps have worked, as far as I know, for years, and I just don't see how, again, that can work. So I know that's big for me to say that a lot of people, and most people, by the way, that's what they do. They don't do online book arbitrage like what we do. They go into thrift stores. Maybe people start off and they graduate. We've had people do that, going to online book arbitrage, but I just don't see how that can work long term. There's the other big thing you need to think about, and I've talked about this in past videos, and this may become one of the biggest issues, and it's not right now, but if you've watched your IPI score since November 3rd or November 5th, you've watched it go down most likely, right? And it could come a point where you get to that threshold, whatever it might be, 400, 500, I probably should know it, but they've changed it a few times, and they say, nope, you're done. You can't even send any more books until you sell these books. And of course, if you're not getting the used buy box, and on top of that, you're buying books or trying to resell books that have a very high average sales rank and don't sell very frequently, it's going to be very, very challenging, and you are going to be stuck, right? You're going to be stuck, and what makes it tougher is you can't just simply, you can't just stop necessarily, right? You can't stop paying the $40 to Amazon. Then you really won't get the buy box, right? And on top of all that, they, for lack of a better word, they're holding the books hostage in a way, because you're either going to pay removal fees or you're going to pay ongoing storage fees. So inaction, I guess that's my point, is that my recommendation that inaction is not going to be a good option. All right. Now, the next one I know people aren't going to like either, and that is, and I told our customers, I think about a week ago or so, is to stop buying acceptable books. Okay. The data is showing that clearly books that are acceptable condition are being deprioritized. Okay. So I guess I'll pull back on that a little bit. There may be a small number of books that I might purchase in acceptable condition, but nowhere near what we used to do. Okay. Those days are going to be gone for us. Okay. That's just my recommendation, but you're not going to get the used buy box as much. Will customers go in there and look for your offer, the lowest price in acceptable condition? Yeah, they might. And if you're doing FBA, though, your competition is somebody that's doing merchant fulfilled that is probably going to be able to outprice you in that area. So acceptable books, I would say, use some extreme caution. And the other thing that's important with acceptable books to know, especially if you're doing online book arbitrage, when you buy a book, let's say it's in good, very good, or like new condition, if it shows up in acceptable condition, I would just turn around and return it, okay? Especially if you bought it on Amazon. You have to remember, when you buy on Amazon, you are a customer, and if you don't get what you ordered, you return it, you'll get a free refund. And that'll, really help the sellers that are selling these books, keep them in line somewhat and grading their books properly. And speaking of grading, make sure you understand that this is the grading system we should be using, okay? Doesn't matter that you have feelings that you want to, you'd rather give somebody the book in acceptable condition, for whatever reason. I would just say, grade your books according to what Amazon says, not for your own personal feelings on the book or anything like that, okay? Just keep it the way it's supposed to be, and I think you'll be far better off. Okay, now the other thing that becomes very important is repricing. Okay, so I think I mentioned it, but since Amazon is no longer going to have the FBA offer, having the buy box primarily, I think what you need to do is immediately, again, stop repricing and pricing your books against the lowest FBA. Instead, what you want to do is one of two things. You want to either price against the used buy box, or you want to price against the lowest price in the same condition as yours. Okay? So let me repeat that to make sure you guys understand what I'm saying and why I'm saying it. For those of you that thought or were in the mindset, I should not be pricing against the used buy box, in the past, the reason you said that to yourself was because the used buy box was mostly maintained by FBA offers. Now it doesn't matter. And I probably need to come out with a new video. Just did some videos on Keepa, but now in this new era, the Keepa charts are going to look a little different. And I'll again get into that later. But the point is that the lowest FBA price is not necessarily having the buy box, right? That's just whoever has the buy box, and it could be merchant fulfilled. So I think you want to price against that or price against the lowest price in the same condition. So that I think that's really important now. You shouldn't, I don't think, you shouldn't be just pricing your book against the lowest price unless it's in acceptable condition, okay? What you certainly don't want to do now is if you have a book in good condition or very good condition, you can't go in and just say, I want to price against the lowest price, okay, regardless of fulfillment center, fulfillment method. Because if you do that, then suddenly your good books are being priced way too low because of these other acceptable offers out there, okay? The other thing is just keep in mind that textbook season is coming up. So this could be, or likely is, the very first textbook season we're ever going to have where we're dealing with this new used buy box logic. So you're really going to need to pay close attention during the textbook season, and that is going to include or should include not only using a good repricer, and I'll talk more about our repricer in a minute perhaps, but also you're going to have to manually go in there and see what's going on because we don't entirely know what the customer's tendencies are going to be. I think there are going to be customers out there, college students, that they start class in a week and a half, they're moving, they're doing all these other things, and they don't have time to wait 2 weeks to get a book from a merchant fulfilled seller. So they may in fact go in there and look for the lowest FBA price or whatever meets their needs. So that's going to be important. We just need to pay really, really close attention to textbook season if you've got a bunch of textbooks in stock with FBA. I mentioned this earlier regarding change, but I think there are some people that treat this business kind of as a hobby more so than as a business, and there's a lot more to this business than just sourcing. So I've got a video, it's a little bit older, but it's still very relevant. The 5 pillars of this business has not changed. So you want to make sure you're up to speed on all 5 of these pillars and treat this really like a business rather than a hobby. And I think you'll be far better off adapting to this change and any other changes that come our way. And my other recommendation is to do some forward thinking like I have, okay? So here's what I think about. In our software, we have, we track supply and demand. So I think to myself, where will we be 6 months from now when the supply perhaps drops significantly if sellers leave the platform? And if in different ways we can think about it, and this probably isn't the best thing to get into details here, but when the supply generally drops, that usually means there's a buying opportunity, and you can see that on the Keepa chart, right? And then if the supply doesn't go up, then and the demand remains the same, then you can really we'll be able to have our books priced perhaps even higher. So what I'm semi-excited about in a way is the summer textbook season in 2026. I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens, particularly if the number of sellers goes down. Okay, so right now people have got a lot of books in their inventory, so I don't know we'll see that effect as much this coming textbook season, but next summer's textbook season, it could be a real buying opportunity when people are perhaps lowering their price. Maybe merchant fulfilled sellers are lowering their price because now they're competing with other FBA offers, and it could be a very interesting time in the summer of 2026. All right, now what is Master Book Flippers going to do, and how are we going to adapt to this change? Now, first of all, I've got a new video that I had it out, and I didn't publish it because it was finished right around when we had this issue come up, and I wanted to see if this was just something temporary. But I'm going to publish the video anyway because we've made some changes to respond, not necessarily this, but just to improve the software. But it's interesting that, you know, now more than ever, you want to buy books where that you're getting a great deal, right? And we've added 2 new things on there. I'll talk about them obviously more in that video, but we've added in 2 things. One is a price war score. So we want to find books when there's a price war going on, right? And that way, if you can take advantage of the price war, then that black line after you make your purchase right after can spike right up. So you'll know you're going to get a great deal. So we've added that into the software. And we've also added in smart strike alerts. So when there is a significant price drop, as you kind of see in these little few examples, you're going to be notified within our software, right? So obviously that's something you're going to want to take advantage of and buy low, and then you know you got a good deal to sell higher, regardless of who has the used buy box. So, and beyond that, I do have some other things planned to adjust to this, right? I'm not the type of person that wants to overpromise you guys anything, so I don't want to get into any details. But it's great that I've got a team of people to help me work on improving the service and adapting to change. We do that pretty darn good, and we're going to continue to do that in the future. Okay. Now, if and when this ever becomes mathematically impossible or just too overwhelming, we're going to let you know that too, right? I'll let you know. I mean, you've already heard my thoughts. I'm not going to hold back in terms of letting you know something is great or it's going to work if it's really not. Now, one thing we can do for you, we don't have sales very often on Master Book Repricer. I know textbook season's coming up. You're going to want to move your inventory. If you're not using an automatic repricer without data blind spots, then you want to check out Master Book Repricer. I will give a discount. I'm not going to put it on the website. I can tell you that right now. If you want to get on our mailing list, you can do so by going here. Download a free resource, and we'll send this out to you. The plan would be to give you a discount, ahead of textbook season. So this upcoming textbook season before January 1st, 2026. So I'll send out a discount code and answer any questions, by the way, if you have about Master Book Repricer to kind of help you along and drive some sales. Thanks for watching. I'd like to know what you guys think about this. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.